we got this thing rolling, everybody had fun, and there was a ton of great stuff going on and parties and girls. But the true businessman mind, the mind behind the band, the brains was Michael Lean, the drummer, and he was the youngest guy. He had just turned 19 when I joined the band, and I was the old man. I was 21. So, Michael was very business-minded. This is way before computers, but, he had a typewriter in our apartment, and he's going to, the copy store, whatever it was called, because I don't think Kinko's was really a major brand at that point, but he's buying typewriter ribbon to type our bios out in a newsletter, So, I mean, he was very business-minded from the get-go, and I kind of was the same with my bands in Wisconsin, but I just graduated from, I'm the big fish in Oshkosh, Wisconsin,
right.
And now I'm in L.A., so I kind of had to play apprentice behind Michael. It was kind of like whatever Michael did, I'd mirror it, and like, what do you need me to do? Fold, 200 newsletters, done, So we're doing that at 9 in the morning, and Todd and George are just getting home from somebody's house after doing blow all night,
Right.
Me and Michael were already up, had, coffee or a big gulp soda, and we're like, hey, we're going to Music Connection, which is a local, industry-based magazine, and we'd be at their offices, and we'd go in and be like, hey, we want to drop some flyers. Is it okay? And, we were doing business for the band from the beginning, and it was two different sets of people in the band. It was Michael and Stevie were driving the business and looking at it that way, and Todd and George were partying, and
So you guys were like the Paul and Gene, and they were the Ace and Peter.
Exactly. And with all respect, I mean, Todd's back playing with me the last 5 years, and, TUFF wouldn't have been the same band had it been anybody different. And I wouldn't have changed anything. But there was times when I remember there was a point we had a manager that we had a falling out with, and then we got signed, and we were on stage, and, like, we were served on stage. Like, our videos, like, number 3 on Dial MTV. We're on a tour bus, and all of a sudden some guy walks up to me, like, third song goes, are you Steven Hansetter, which is my real name? I'm like, yeah. And he goes, you're the singer from TUFF, here you go. And he hands me a stack of documents on the stage, right? I look at Michael, and I'm like, we just been served a lawsuit. So fast forward a couple months, we have to go to court. So we're in court. And we had a court appearance, and George went on one of his party, extravaganzas where he didn't come home for 3 days. He finally appears. Like, we're freaking out because we hadn't even seen him. We get him in a car. We all go down to the courthouse, and George is like, he's nodding off in court, because he hadn't slept in like 4 days or something. And we're in there, and like, we had a lawyer and all that. But like, George is literally like, looked like, Chris Holmes, he's just like fucking piled over in a chair. We're like, dude, what are you doing? That was the kind of shit that happened, which at one point we're like, oh man, these guys, So, but you can't have 4 Gene and Pauls in the band, and you can't have 4 Ace or Peters in the band. At one point, there's got to be a balance,
Now, how did you and Todd get back together?
Well, the thing is, me and Todd were the two that were the most at odds in the band, We had, every band has their David Lee Roth, Eddie Van Halen arguments, and their Vince and Tommy or whatever it is, Axl and Slash. But it was me and Todd that had the biggest, differences in opinion. And who knows what the reasons were, but, Todd grew to the point where he hated me, and he basically quit the band, within a couple of months of us being, on Dial MTV. I mean, we're still signed to Atlantic. We just had a top 10 video, and we had a couple incidents on the road, and I had a little bit of a temper at times, and there was a couple of physical situations. I mean, no one ever got beat up or hospitalized, like Dizzy Dean did to, Michael Kelly Smith, but there was a couple of incidents that, and it got to the point where he was just like, fuck Stevie, either we kick Stevie out of the band or I quit, and there was actually an incident between me and George that happened, and Todd tried to break it up, and I basically looked at him and said, dude, I'll kill you. something to that effect. And of course, then it was a big thing. Our road manager jumped in, and everybody's arguing. And it was at the end of a tour. We had a really long year. And so Todd just came to a point where everybody told him, hey, let's chill out. It's the holiday. Let's let the new year pass. Let's have a meeting in January and get back together and see what everyone's thinking. And, Michael was over it. George was over it. I was over it. Todd was not. So then Todd posed the option, kick Stevie out of the band and let's get a new singer, or I quit. And everybody was pretty much like, dude, are you serious?
Right.
That's not going to work, And so he opted to quit, And so Todd quit, and we didn't talk for like 10 years. I mean, the guy hated me, and so, but years passed, and eventually, we ended up going out to eat or something, and, he came around and was like, hey, dude, I was an ass back in the day. I did some crazy shit. And it was over drugs, too. I mean, they were doing a lot of coke and I was kind of, being a militant Sergeant Carter, like, what the fuck are you doing? I'm screaming at them. They're all coked out of their mind and hadn't slept in 3 days, and we're supposed to be in court. It's like, yeah, that really isn't going to look good for us.
And that was the big thing, too. Like, for you as, like, the front man of a hair band, like, you don't drink or do drugs. You were never a partier.
Never once. So, and here's the funny thing is, years and years went by, and then eventually, this is, over the last, say, 10 years, I'm like, hey, Todd, why don't you play with me? Because we had been friends again, and he had come out to a couple shows. I'm like, dude, I just went to Brazil, I went to Australia, I'm going to Europe, I have, And so at one point I convinced him. We had a show in Mexico City with, like, Skid Row, with Solinger and Enough's Enough, and the Pretty Boy Floyd guys, and so I convinced him to go, and we did a couple rehearsals, and I said, let's just get in a room first. Let's rehearse, see if you have fun with it,
Mm-hmm.
And he did, and we played some shows, and he loved it, and he's been back in the band since, and we get along better than ever, as much as we agreed to disagree over times. He understands what I've done with the brand over the years, and he's happy to be part of it, and I welcome him as, without Todd, this band would have never even started. So
now, how about will there ever be an original, the show with a 4 classic lineup of you guys with Michael and George?
Well, honestly, I mean, I love that, and we actually had a meeting, all 4 of us. We went to dinner, and this was, I don't want to say, probably a little bit more than maybe about 5 years ago, about the time that Todd had actually played maybe the first show. I mean, it was a little bit maybe before that, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. So we planned to get together for dinner, which we did, and it was the first time that Michael, George, Todd, and Stevie all were sitting at the same table, since like 1991 or something. It had been literally like 15 years. So we just went out to eat at this Italian restaurant. And, I showed up, and Michael showed up next, and he had to come the farthest, and then Todd was there, and we all waited 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. We're like, oh, let's order some bread, let's get, those guys got a couple of beers, and 45 minutes, traditional, just like old days, George is late, always late. Last guy to rehearsal, last guy out of the hotel room, last guy into the bus, last guy out of the bunk, I mean, and it was just like we all looked at each other like, what a joke, he's going on an hour late, and so, but, we hung out, we ate, we actually got together with George a couple times, me and T, who had been Todd Burr, who had been playing drums with me for a few years, he jammed with us. George actually jammed with me a couple times in a rehearsal setting, and we were going to do some shows together about 6 or 7 years ago, and then we had something in Europe, and suddenly we realized his passport had expired and he couldn't get it renewed, and because of some issues, I guess you could call them personal, and so I couldn't take him, and I ended up having to get Kerry Kelly to play some shows, and then George was mad at me, well, fuck him, and I'm like, dude, I'm supposed